Right, good evening, everybody. It's 7 o'clock to start. So just to remind folks, this is being recorded, so if you're not speaking, to have your camera turned on. Okay, starting with the agenda, apologies.
Thank you, Chair. Apology submitted from Councillor Gregor Murray, and Councillor Michael Firmage is here as a substitute this evening.
Thank you. Moving on to minutes of the previous meeting. We've got a whole slew of minutes there. Any comments, questions on the minutes? No. Should we take them as read? Yeah. Yeah. All minutes. Do you have any specific questions or any? Oh. Yeah. So I was just saying for all.
Are members happy with all 4 sets?
Yeah. Are members happy with all 4 sets? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Go on, Shirley. Microphone, please.
On the minutes of the 26th of October, page 45, I asked a question about unaccompanied asylum-seeking children and university tuition fees. Just to say I haven't had a response to that.
Yeah, I'm in contact with the director on that. I'm still waiting a response.
Okay, thanks, Callum. And I'm not sure whether this is appropriate, but it seems the right place to ask it. On the minutes 3rd of the 11th, page 31, there was a question. There was a question saying, was it possible to get more solar farms online at a faster rate? And the executive member response was that future sites would be smaller than the Barkham site, and they would be taken forward as quickly as feasible. And I just wondered, as a kind of a matter arising out of that, I read an article in the newspaper recently that some large projects are waiting 15 years to be connected to the grid, such is the backlog of, and obviously that would have a bearing on all manner of things going forward. You know, we're expecting to start repaying loans and earning money on that. So I just wondered if we had assurances that we were in the queue for the grid, basically.
Pauline, do you have a comment on that?
I think that question, although it wasn't mine, was generated by a local solar farm that managed to get built and installed and up and running in 6 months, it appears. So it was provoked by other solar farms elsewhere. I think it's quite variable.
Yeah,
I think it depends how big they are, actually.
yeah, I think it probably is from region to region, but it was particularly saying that if
So what we'll do, Shirley, we'll dig into that one to see if there's any clarification to come.
yeah, thank you very much. That's fine, thank you. That was it.
Okay, just make a proposal, just go around the table, make sure we're all happy with them. So vote to say yay. Okay, stop. Thank you. Right, moving on to, do we have any public questions?
No questions submitted, Chair.
Do we have any member questions?
Again, the same, none submitted.
So moving on to the first agenda item, which is the Combating Drugs Partnership. Have you seen this afternoon? Unfortunately, Narinda is off ill, so we're going to have to reschedule that event. However, we do have Ian Shenton here. So if we do have any sort of quick questions based upon the report, to see if there's anything that you'd like added to the report when Narinda comes back. So Michael.
Yeah, just a very quick one. I just wondered how spread the drugs problems it's actually in Wokingham Borough Council area. It'd be interesting to find out what that was.
Exactly.
I can make a note of that,
Yeah.
Michael. I can make a note of that.
Thank you.
David.
Yeah, the point that caught my eye was the 3 bullet points of breaking the supply chain, delivering treatment, and shifting demand. I mean, it seems to my unexpert opinion that achieving the shift in demand is the biggest win, and it'd be interesting to know when this report comes before the committee to what the actions actually are being considered to break demand.
Thank you. Ian, did you get that?
Yeah, I'm jotting down furiously.
If not, I'll send you the notes as well. Ian.
Oh, excellent. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for Ian? No. I do have a question, Ian.
I know that
sorry,
Narinda has a full presentation to go through when she as well.
Okay, I do have Norman who has a question for you.
Yeah, I noticed in the statistics for people that were caught over Christmas period for drunk or drug driving, I was quite surprised at the percentage charge with drug driving was actually quite high. At least I thought it was quite high. I'd just be interested in feedback on that. Any comment on that?
Yes, I share your surprise on that, Norman.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I do have a couple of questions myself, Ian. Will we have any information on impact on school children with respect to drugs, like the selling out of drugs outside of schools, what's being how that's being combated, and also the use of, I can't remember the phrase, air canisters, because we do get a lot of reports of air canisters being left around. So if there's any combat for that.
Yeah, I think that's obviously something that this is all a new process which has stemmed from central government action and central government funding, and obviously we're still getting into our stride on this.
Great, thank you. If there's no other questions for Ian, then I guess we can send this item away. Then we'll look forward to you coming forward again when Narinda's well. Okay, thank you, Ian.
Okay, thank you.
Right, moving on to the meat of this meeting, we'll move on to the medium-term financial plan. So with that, I'll hand over to Graham and Imogen to take it away.
Yeah, Graham's obviously going to present it, but basically it's the update since we got the local government finance settlement in December and any other updates that have gone in with it. You've seen most of it, so this is just sort of the final run, I guess. So away you go, Graham.
Okay, thank you, Imogen. Thank you, Chairman. So this is the final presentation and discussion around the MTFP, and it's intended, as Imogen said, to bring you up to date in terms of the latest. The latest picks up answers to the questions that have been raised throughout the various sessions, picks up the latest movements on revenue and capital and the local government finance settlement as well. And I must stress, however, setting budgets is always a movable feast, and I'm not saying for certain nothing will change, but this is the latest we have at this point in time, which obviously is pretty close to the finale at council in February. That's what this is. Right, so I did stress in the email I sent over the weekend, if there are any questions of detail, then please let me know. That obviously increases my chances of being able to answer them. I did get some questions that came through, so I'll leave it to you, Chairman, where you want those, the answers interjected. But this is a collection of the questions and issues we received throughout the process, and here's the responses. I don't intend to go through everything line by line, but I'll take it page by page. Is there anything that provokes a further query, issue?
David.
Just as a general, Graham, going through those whole 3 pages and the process that went before them, did that process actually offer up any further savings, or was it pretty much it was the same at the end of when we started?
I can't think of anything that you'll see directly in the track changes, but that's not to say there weren't some useful insights that can be incorporated maybe at a later date, lines of inquiry, that type of thing. So I think in the broad sense, it's been helpful, but I think you might struggle to see a particular, oh, that's what we said, and therefore this is in the track changes.
Okay, moving on.
Okay, so that was page 1. This was page 2. And you'll see, I guess, picking up on Councillor Cornish's point, some of these are locate them in other work streams. So it's not that they've just been received and disregarded. Sure. Yep.
Do you mind if I dragged you back to page 1? Sorry, I was slightly behind, still thinking about something else. The comment about Toutley, the various options for the works on the depot has been considered, and it's been confirmed that the work was required. What other options were considered?
I think in terms of Toutley, options considered would be, this is around the depot, yeah. So it would have been around forms of refurbishment, forms of partial completion, to full rebuild, that type of thing. So it will be a permutation of the options from do nothing to rebuild in full.
And there was no savings found as part of that process.
Do you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, whatever we do with Tatley Depot, it's going to cost us money. There's no savings involved in it at all. So,
sorry, I'm thinking of saving on the capital budget. I would note that maybe 2 years ago we were told that there was nothing could be done with Early Station footbridge apart from replacing it completely at a cost of about 6 or 7 million. I can't remember exactly what it was. Now there seems to be a rebuild. Now we for 2 years were pushing on trying to get maintenance done on that bridge rather than a replacement. And that was said to be impossible for a couple of years, and now it's possible. We were also pushing on trying to get the cost of Toutley down, and I just wondered whether there was any movement on that.
What I can assure you, in terms of movement, if anything, I think the costs have gone up. Inflation being the primary factor driving up costs. But I can assure you there's been an awful lot of consideration around what we can forego doing in order to pare back, for sure. But I don't have all of those details, and I have seen bigger numbers then reduced to smaller numbers, but they're still quite painfully big numbers, yes. This was page 2 that I had previously presented, page 3.
Michael.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm just really going right to the very end of page 3, when it's stated here that considering increasing the excess from 25,000 to 50,000 pound when the policy renews in June. I'm just really wondering what effect that have on the premium. Is it worthwhile doing it? Is the reduction in premium making it worthwhile doing that? Because if there's not much in it, I would say don't do it. And that's coming from an insurance broker.
Yeah, I'm indeed aware of your background there.
Yes.
So, of course, I'll answer with great caution. You're absolutely right in terms of playing around with the excesses isn't always the best thing to do. But I think what we're saying here is in the procurement tender process, we will try to tease out if indeed it does make good business sense. The answer will be in the responses to the tender.
Yeah, I mean, the answer to that is, yeah, you need to compare it to what you've got, the option of not doing it and doing it, and obviously see what works.
Correct.
Okay, before we go on, I neglected to ask about declaration of interest. So I have to ask, anybody got a declaration of interest? So I say no. Great. Thank you. Sorry, Graham.
And being a council taxpayer is not one of them, I don't think. Okay. Okay, now moving on to the local government finance settlement that is extremely complex, but does amount to, this is a substantial part of the picture, but not absolutely everything. So the real essence of the local government's finance settlement is to determine the council's core spending power, which has all sorts of items identified within it. The most significant of which is our council tax income. And therefore, the amount that we get on a headline of, say, 7% increase, the 7% increase in terms of government grant attaches itself to a much, much smaller figure and then translates to a total of 1.8 million additional grant, which sounds like a reasonable percentage increase, but in the context of inflation in total now 11 million, growth 9 million, obviously it's, you know, a relatively small contribution towards that. What I've set out here is also within the local government finance settlement, there is a requirement to respond to what I shared with you previously, is the autumn statement that increased the national, the minimum national living wage. And that will translate quite directly into an impact on our cost of care, and therefore the provision needed in adult social care. So 2 million as a minimum was identified to passport to adult social care, which in the grand scheme of things left us at pretty much a balanced position. So we had additional adult social care grant, which effectively which made up that 1.8 million, which effectively was passported straight to adult social care to meet their increased commissioning costs as a result of the 9% increase in national living wage.
Polly.
Thank you very much. Can you confirm, Graham, that 1.8 million wasn't in your original assumptions the last time you brought this to us, and that was an extra bit of money that you didn't have in the last run through these figures? And I suspect the 2 million wasn't either. Is that right?
Spot on. Neither of these were included in the first iteration, but I did alert to both in my predictions of the outcome of the autumn statement. So to summarise that, you got 1.8 million more than you expected from the government, but you also have a which is good news, but you also have a gap of 2 million as well. Thank you. And you didn't expect that gap? That's correct. So you see that net income / pressure on the MTFP is the net impact of the local government finance settlement on the last figures I presented to you. £200,000 worse off.
He basically predicted that it would be 2 million. He basically predicted it would be 2 million, but what came in was slightly less than 2 million.
Predicted it was going to be 0 in the last iteration, and what came in was 1.8 million, so we got more than he expected, but he's found another bill for 2 million that he hadn't got in his original figures.
Yeah, that's one way of looking at it, but yes.
So I think to David's point, that's a 200k reduction effectively.
It's a 200k problem, yes.
But you actually already had a £2 million problem, you just didn't realise it, probably.
Well, it was directly linked to the announcement around the national living wage. So prior to the autumn statement, we weren't aware of that announcement.
You might have expected it, I would imagine. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Yeah, doesn't matter. It's a matter of fact.
Normal.
The bit in italics underneath, trying to negotiate extra income from the Better Care Fund. How is that going, and how do you think that might go without holding your feet to the fire particularly?
There's two main challenges around that. It's the actual nature of the calculation, and there's something called the Improving Better Care Fund calculation, which absolutely, I say destroys, is quite an emotive word, but it gives us an incredibly small allocation. So there's the adult social care relative needs. We know we are the lowest funded unitary based on relative needs. The Improving Better Care calculation gives us about 20% of the relative needs distribution. So there's that concern. There's a further, then that becomes exacerbated in terms of how it's the Berkshire, Oxfordshire, Buckinghamshire healthcare system. So it's not a direct line of sight. So it is premature to say how it's going, but it's just to stress it's not, I mean, straightforward, even if we knew the sum we could target.
And when will that be decided?
I don't know. I'm sorry.
Up with Norman, would it be useful if I followed that up with Matt Pope and get an answer for you? Yeah. Al.
Yes, Matt might give the same answer to me. So I'll pick it up with Matt because he needs to know.
Yeah, can I just ask, of the 161.9 million, is that all council tax, or how much is council tax and how much is from the government?
It's not all council tax, some of it's grants, isn't it? So
So 91 point, sorry, that's the increase. The maths has let me down. I think it's about 90 million.
Is council tax?
Yeah, a massive part of it is council tax. Might be more actually.
Oh, right, about 90 million.
but
Right.
council tax doesn't cover all of the services we provide. So there is some money that's in grants, some of it's in revenue income from car parking and other such things. And we are dependent on that extra revenue income to basically run the services we have. So council tax does not cover everything we need to do.
Okay.
That doesn't feature in the core spending power, DSG. So it's a substantial part is council tax, 90 odd million. And then, the rest is grant substantially retained business rates.
Yeah.
But there's things like new homes bonus in there and adult social care grants. And
Okay, moving on. Oh, sorry, David.
Just, I'm not directed to this, but just as a note for the future, Graham, I find that explanation very helpful. I'm sure other less experienced councillors would as well. And if at some point we could see some kind of, I don't know, it's a pie chart or bar chart, whatever, just showing sources of income and allocation costs going out, that would just help me cough on some of us.
In your report, that boy.
I think your question's specifically around the core spending power, isn't it?
The core spending for certain, but actually understanding it right across the council finances would be interesting as well.
Yes, indeed. It's I'm trying to think if it's in the CFO.
I think it's in your
It is.
report. There is one in
CFO
your
report that's going to January executive. Fees and charges is in there.
It went out on Thursday.
It's already out in the public.
Well, yes, it's on the website. Yeah. But it does have a little pie chart just dividing it all up. So
yeah, okay. So there is a note there about risks on business rates. Business rates is very complex, and also there's a revaluation as well, effective from next year. So it's a risk that we need to keep under review. Right, this shows the movement. Now, I'm sure you would expect us to we have to ultimately land up as 0. So we were at a 4 million challenge, we're now at 0. And because we have to set a balanced budget. So then the question is, well, what's happened to get there? But it's amounted to a 4 million positive movement to get to 0 by necessity. And then there's smaller movements in the following years. This is just a reminder of what's already been presented and discussed in lockdown 1. That's all trying to provide an audit trail. And these are the key changes and explains how we've managed to bridge the gap. So I've already explained some of these through the autumn statement, but just for completeness, this talks effectively through lockdown 1 summary to lockdown 2 summary. There are some pretty significant items there. One is the council tax assumed at 2.99 and a 2% adult social care precept, which was announced through the local government finance settlement. We've used reserves to bridge 1.4 million. We've added to our staffing, which is called the Workforce Organisation Foundation Programme, to find a further 1.4 million. The social care charging reforms, that's the charging reforms, not all reforms, have been delayed to 25-26, and you'll see how that's reflected financially. I talked about the additional pay and contract inflation, including adult social care, to provide a much more reasonable inflation position both next year and the following 2 years. It shows the social care, explains the repurposed social care grant, which was that 2 million I talked about, and very significantly includes a 3-year contribution to the DSG deficit recovery, which is forecast to be £16 million deficit at the end of this year. And when we worked with the DFE and projected beyond, we were moving towards figures near 100 million. It was rather stark and concerning. And this is all in what's called EHCPs, Education Health Care Plans. It's statutory, it's very difficult terrain, it's very expensive. It doesn't mean we can't do anything, but often doing something takes time and takes investment. So I've reflected 1% each of the next 3 years in the table as well.
Okay, before we go on, Alden's got a question.
Thank you. I've got 2 questions now, actually. I only had one when I put my hand up. The DSG deficit recovery, 1%, what is that? How much money?
This reflects.
This has been an ongoing problem for a while.
I know what the problem is. I want to know how much money's coming out of the budget to fix it.
So this shows council tax 1%, DSG deficit recovery 1251, increasing to 2557, increasing to 3863.
Sorry, just explain to me what the delta is. I'm being a bit slow. How much is going into the DSG to fix the gap next year?
£1,251,000 increases to £2,557,000, increases to £3,863,000.
And if you hadn't done that 1%, what would those figures look like?
If this wasn't going on,
Yeah,
then we would be having a DSG deficit increasing from £16 million to, well, I said towards 100 million over 5 years.
So have we ever done this before?
We've never produced a forecast in the way that we have of late that we were required to do under the safety valve programme.
Okay.
But we have got a very clear, if you look at the DSG deficit, since the regulations changed around DSG, it moved from, say, 500,000 in year to 1 million in year to 3 million to 6 million in year. So it's a runaway escalating deficit.
So what worries me about this is how much control we've got on it. So we're paying the bill. How much control have we got on the spend?
In some ways, you can say it's difficult because EHCP is a statutory world and we are very dependent on partners, cooperation. It's a system response. However, what I would say is by working in the right way, say early intervention, prevention, support, bringing in our partners to work alongside us. All of these are kind of aspects of the safety valve program and is wholly necessary. So it's complex and we don't have a simple, direct decision on our own to make about it, but there are a whole host of strands of work we can do to get on top of this in a better way.
So it's all to do with the HCP. It's not to do with anything else.
EHCPs are the
High needs
drivers
block, isn't it?
it's
It's all within the high needs block.
yes, so it's EHCPs are driving the overspend in the high needs block, which is a block within the DSG.
Thank you. So the question I was going to ask when I stuck my hand up was the ruling group have been consistently telling us that the reserves were at the absolute minimum that they could be, and they couldn't reduce them anymore, and that was all our fault. And now I see you're taking more out of the reserves. Could you explain that?
Obviously, I'm not going to explain the political point, but I can explain the transactional point, which is 1.4 million is coming from the RE3 equalisation fund, which has £5.5 million in it and has no obvious use at the moment other than it's an equalisation fund.
The critical fund is the general fund reserves, isn't it? So yeah, that's the one we can't.
So part of the work of trying to balance the books was to go through all of our reserves, all of our earmarked reserves, and say, do we really need this in such challenging times? Do we really need this? If not, can that be part of the solution? And to be fair, in the local government finance settlement, there is the narrative in the settlement that councils should be dipping into reserves if they can. So it is consistent with that line of encouragement.
Thank you. And with this point, I'm going to have to go to personnel board and I'll be back. Thank you.
David.
Oh, wait. Without politics or with it?
Yeah. I kind of have a question on that same sort of thing. So it'd be useful to have visibility on different reserves that we do have. I wasn't aware of an RE3 reserve thingy. It'd just be interesting to find out what you have there.
Plan of the reserves, yeah.
Okay. So this shows the inflation now, 10.9. And in the following years. This represents a one-off piece of money for adult social care to address the additional challenges that particularly come out of the autumn statement. This represents.
Almost got a question.
Sorry, Greg, just going back to the man management one, the special item. So what does that actually do? What are we doing for that £500,000?
I'd have to get back from Matt, the detail on that, but it's significantly attached to the reforms and the work of the reforms and the impact of the reforms on the service, but it'll be better to get a more explicit description from that.
Okay, fine, okay.
So these in black is where the problem, this is growth, this is less, not, this is the bad news, is where it's in black. So it means that reduction, the saving of 345k in chief executives has reduced to a saving of 204k because of these two items now need to be accommodated. So if you remember, this is like a track changes from what you've seen before. So this is saying whatever you've seen before, we've now had to put in 128k more for the first item, and there's 13k more that we've had to accommodate.
Out and Norman.
Yeah, it's just that I don't remember in the previous presentations anything about communities to run smaller libraries. Is that, or am I just forgetting that?
Yes, there was a line, and there's a template and a line, and it was just simply tidying up the number.
Okay.
Basically.
Okay.
I think it was about 140, something like that.
Norman.
Suppose following on from that question, then you've adjusted the value of that. So, what was the reasoning for changing that value? Have we got commitments, or is that just a refined guess, so to speak, in inverted commas?
To be honest, I think this was just a tidying up, and this was the only one I'm aware of. But the figure that was presented to you was slightly out of line with the initial summary, so it was just a tidying up. It wasn't any more in terms of a specific plan or anything like that changes anything.
And on the other one, the social care system increased software licensing and hosting costs. I mean, that seems quite a chunk. So I guess that the system must be pretty essential to what we're doing to be paying that amount of money, I guess.
Doesn't it do both adult?
Yes, indeed. It's the one that provides that functionality for adults and children. So yes, it is very significant.
Yeah, it's pretty substantial.
David.
Just picking up on that point, actually, if that's the increase, what's the total cost?
I don't know.
It's
the
an
answer to
expensive
that.
one, I know that, but it's a statutory, it's an industry standard application that they're using, that they have to use.
Yeah, just a point. We did actually query about the cost and supply of that software to Prue, and seems like there's limited suppliers.
That's right. In terms of this product, I think we're talking one or two out there in the market. Yeah, that are reliable.
So really, you've got a standard cost there of 128 per year. Is that for a 3-year license, or is that a recurring 1-year license that would be subject to variation?
Yeah, so I don't know the detail on this particular line.
Yes.
We would have to follow that up with Sally.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, this was just a tidying up. The initial figures were presented, say, well, not clearly or incorrectly. So it basically just tidies up the previous growth and savings bids.
Home to school transport is an ongoing problem and quite expensive,
Oh yes, for sure, and
horrendously expensive. It's a serious problem.
and we presented that growth pressure here, and talked about that at some length. Homeschool transport, but this slide you'll see the bottom line doesn't change. It's just tidying up what's gone before.
Sorry, again, just looking at that line, is the 266 on the two lines just coincidence, or is that number playing?
No, what happened is when the bids were initially presented, they were presented in a way that gave the impression one was 266 higher than it should have been, and one was 2. So the bottom line was fine. It was how they were grouped and presented needed correcting to be more accurate, and that's what this is.
Okay.
So it's not a coincidence. It was, the quantum was fine. It was just the categorization within. These are all the changes, place and growth. Remember, so the credits are reductions from previous growth bids. And the ones in black without brackets add expenditure, meaning overall there's a positive movement almost to the tune of 200k.
Okay, I think, Shirley, is this your first question?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, one of my questions was concerning this £900 charge for the resident second parking permits, and this came up in one of the previous meetings, and it was told, well, this was a sort of, it wasn't decided, and £900 was it was a kind of a target figure or something sort of bizarre. But the more I think about it, I think, could we really justify charging £900 for a second residence parking permit? And is that final now that that's going to happen? Is what I'm asking.
Would it be better to answer all of the questions that you raised, Shirley, which of course includes that?
At the end, whichever you prefer, I don't mind, as long as they get answered.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, let's take Shirley's all as a group and answer them at the relevant points. Is that fair?
Okay, we'll answer the relevant.
So you want to answer?
Okay, so this is number 4. The proposal remains with a 62k additional income budget for 24-25, and each year after that. Discussions are ongoing in relation to how this is implemented, but it will be in line with other parking related charges in order to make it workable, and therefore implementation will not be until 24-25. I think that's saying it's been thought about and no firm decisions been made, and of course it's not going to be enacted till 24-25, which gives the grace of time to work through.
It's obviously Paul's area, something that he's working through as on highways, but it is quite clear, certainly in London, that you get one parking permit, street parking permit, quite cheaply, but for a second car, they do charge a premium. And that's probably what it is.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I mean, I live right on the boundary with Reading, and Reading also charge a large amount for the second car, but they don't charge £900. And we already have hundreds of people coming and parking in my ward because they don't want to pay for the second charge. And I just think you'll have people parking elsewhere and causing problems. But it looks like it's a what's this space at the moment.
Yeah,
so I will very carefully watch this space.
Yeah, something that's going to be thrashed out, and if it requires some adjustment in different areas, I'm sure Paul will look at it. So, yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, David.
Am I understanding it correctly that we're saving £250,000 because we're making more waste and recycling collections from more houses?
No, what this is saying is initially there was a growth bid that was presented to this committee, and that growth bid has now reduced by £250,000, and that may well be, and I believe it is, it's the assumptions behind that growth bid have been challenged. For example, it might be does it need an extra vehicle, driveway, and then obviously in the endeavours of trying to cut a cloth is, well, actually it doesn't, and we can make do without.
Laura.
Thank you. Is that similar for the Domestic Abuse Commission services? Because I seem to remember it was originally a bid for 75,000, and that seems to be reduced down now.
Yes, and that needs to be taken in also in the context of this slide here. So you'll see that the domestic abuse has reduced by 75k. And if it was a 75k growth bid, I can't remember, but I think it might have been, then that came out and it's been replaced with a special item, which means it's been given the proposal is it's given the money for 1 year. Then I suppose the arrangements will be reviewed rather than assuming the initial growth of 75,000. So yes, that does take out the growth, but that's only part of the picture because then a special item for 1 year comes in.
Okay, thank you.
No other questions on this slide?
Now, I've explained this largely. So special items are just for the year that they're labelled, whereas growth goes on and savings goes on and on. Here's just some various changes in resource and assets. Obviously, the credit is reduction in costs, and then the 130k is part of a Berkshire-wide arrangement. So all Berkshire authorities are having to pick up a larger cost to keep this service running.
Could you just explain for my edification the coroner's court thing?
Okay, so the coroner's court is a Berkshire-wide service run through Reading Borough Council, and obviously all things related to the coroner's service needs to be funded across the 6 authorities, and they've experienced some considerable cost increases and increase in demand, and that total cost falls on all 6, and then it's shared out across each 6 on an agreed previous formula. So we have to have a coroner's service, a statutory requirement.
Okay, I think I'm just wondering why it's increased.
And everything else, inflation's probably
Well,
hit them.
demand,
Yeah.
and inflation, yeah. Cost of removing bodies and what have you.
Okay. Norman?
That just leads me to a question. I don't think we've ever seen anything at any scrutiny meeting or anywhere else about anything to do with coroner's court. Where do they report into as far, where they're responsible to as far as we're concerned, or are we just paying the bill? Again, it's another one of these where if we're paying the bill, we'd like to be able to find out what they're doing and could they be doing it better, sort of kind of thing.
It's a good question. It's run by Reading Borough Council, as I said, so it'll be interesting to know what reporting mechanisms go on there. They're also accountable to the chief executives. But in terms of a regular reporting to a public meeting here, yeah, you're right. I don't.
Should it be coming to hospital, something like that, or it's obviously public health, so.
Yeah. Well, we can certainly ask and see if they can come up and present, especially provoked by this additional cost, to present a report on how's it all going and why the additional costs.
I think the first part of my question really was where they report to and you know how they're, what the line of responsibility from them to us is. I guess is the first question. And then we maybe think about it in future. Might be this committee even in the future if it's appropriate.
Yeah, I do think it'd be worthwhile having a look at, bearing in mind it has increased significantly. So anyway, Shirley.
I was just going to add, I've had a bit of experience with the coroner's court after my husband died, and they had an enormous backlog. They used to have a coroner's court in Reading, and then they closed that down to save money, and they rent space in the town hall, which is not ideal, but that's the thing. But we had to wait just under a year for my husband's inquest to take place, and it was because They had a succession of interim coroners who then moved on to somewhere else. It is quite distressing. But I know that they just basically said there was a shortage of coroners. So it could just be that the increase is something to do with employing more staff or something. But I think it's right that perhaps we should have some kind of scrutiny of the process. But I don't think they're answerable specifically to Reading. I think but they're possibly answerable to a slightly higher body somewhere, but not sure where. But yeah.
They probably have their own professional body that they report to. But
Yeah, probably. Yeah, something like that. But I think they certainly rent space from Reading Borough Council rather than anything else.
Strikes me as it belongs with HOS because they deal with medical services and dental services and things like that. Yeah.
Okay, so
Oh, sorry, could I just answer quickly? Yeah, you're absolutely right, Shirley. Backlogs is an issue, and employing additional resource was part of it. And of course, it's a statutory service, so it will report to some other statutory body as well.
so Michael.
So, yeah, thank you. I mean, Norman and Shirley raised some good points there. My understanding that the coroner's court were actually the responsibility of the Home Office. Now it's probably got now the Department of Justice. Is that still the case? I didn't think it's anything to do with local authorities.
Well, it must be because we pay the bills.
So
Oh, yes, obviously it. But I think like everything else, Graham, I've never seen that before anywhere.
So I think underlying this, actually, there is a requirement to actually have them come to a scrutiny meeting, so we actually get to know what we get for our money.
Yeah, and just for clarity, it is a local authority expenditure and all 6 local authorities pay for it. This is just an increase in the costs, and that's why it's appearing on this page. But there's a base budget and has been a base budget since we become unitary.
But that kind of sounds like a wacky scheme if you spread the blame, saying I'll get some money off them, off them, off them. So if no one's questioning that, they're all busy paying for it. So I'm being facetious there, but there is a requirement to actually, let's test it and see what's going on.
Sure, we do have shared service functions Berkshire-wide on a number of things, and this is one of them.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's just something slightly different. I mean, are we topping up central government contributions on this? Or is it just all being supported by local authorities?
The latter. This is all.
It is just, there's no central government whatsoever on it.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, that's interesting.
Okay, moving on from that one.
Okay, this is a contribution for tackling poverty, which was referenced actually in the Council Tax Reduction Scheme report the other night. These are not included in the council tax calculation, but it's an attempt to give you as specific an account of the risks that we hold within the budget, as in we haven't provided for these, and they're therefore risks that we need to guard against.
The inflation you put on the end.
Inflation, yeah, at the end, obviously, it's significant. So this is over and above that we know that departments are going to have to work really hard with their contractors to negotiate keeping rates down and cutting cloth. It also includes something you'll see later as well, is the pressures in year 2 and 3 on the capital programme, and potentially having to provide in revenue in future years to fund the appetite or necessary investment, because quite often, especially after paring back a capital programme so rigorously, you're quite often left with statutory or close to statutory, like school places. So sometimes you might pare back to the point you have very little choice. And we've talked about early footbridge, we talked about Townley Depot, but those two and school places, they're big sums of money.
David.
There's
Those are all risks. Do we have any sense of scale of probability? I mean, are some of them very real risks, more than 50%? Some of them are highly unlikely, but we need to guard against it? Because that's a blooming big number if they all come off.
Yeah, I would say the reason why I've singled these out and shown with you, I would say that they are high, and therefore an awful lot of work needs to go on throughout the year to deal with them. So they're not high enough, just short of being high enough to include in the figures. However, they set themselves aside from a whole other list of risks I could list for you. So yeah, okay, if you want to say these are the 50% ones, then these are maybe the 50% plus, but not as. So they're the embedded challenge, and that's why I've teased them out. Without doubt, inflation will impact on the council in excess of some of the budget lines, but my expectation is we will meet the challenge in terms of finding reductions elsewhere, and having successful negotiations with contractors, that type of thing.
Chris.
Not to put you in a corner or anything, but your figures for inflation, what sort of percentage are you calculating around? About 4%?
Oh, right. I'll go back to this slide here. So it breaks down into those three chunks. So we've got pay, which we put in 4%, 4%, 3%, obviously massively lower than headline inflation. Adult social care, I think we're kind of talking about 6%, that territory, but again, a real challenge to keep that to that level in the context of national living wage, etc. Contracts, that will, just a simple calculation would mean that's probably not much higher than 3%. So it's quite a challenge. Don't hold me to that, but it's of that ilk as opposed. And therefore, we're going to have to work really hard through good procurement, good recommissioning, good conversation to hold those down. 2.8 million to cover everything else in the calendar is quite challenging, which is the primary reason I'm flagging it in that risk schedule.
Thanks very much for
that. I suppose I would just add 11 million provision for inflation is huge, and I don't think any of you would really welcome the fact that I made it 15 or 20 million, because it just means we need to find the money from elsewhere. So it's holding that tension of providing something, but not.
How much last year, from last year?
Last year's was 8 million, I believe.
But nobody, this time last year, nobody knew that Putin was going to invade Ukraine. And so you just cannot predict what's going to happen, what effect that has. So.
Okay. So that slide was really explaining, that there's a lot of tough stuff to do in order to even meet the figures that we set out in the revised summary. This was the first show of the capital, which is now changed by the red brackets means reduced, and you'll see that there's quite a lot of reduction and necessary reduction over that 4-year period. And then on the right hand side, there's a column saying here's the residual budget over 4 years.
Okay, David, and then I think Shirley, because you've got a question on the bridge. David first.
Thank you. I'll ask two parochial questions, parochial since I know a bit about them, but the issues may apply elsewhere. On the California Lakeside refurbishment, the £600,000 there in the budget, but as I understand it, at least half of that is being funded by parish councils and town councils. So I don't quite understand why that number is quite so high. And you want to have the second one at the same time? It's still, it's 1.6.
Yeah, I think if I understand this right, and there isn't a previous figure, then the 600 does include the fact that there's contributions from other parties. So just to explain how the capital programme, we put the gross cost of the scheme in. If there happens to be money funded from the parish or SIL or what have you, then we'll show that in a credit line somewhere else. So it's not a netted down figure.
So the maximum, I mean, I do know the parish is concerned with challenge, that's £600,000 anyway. But that's an absolute maximum, that's not half the total, is what you're saying.
I don't know.
That's the total including the contributions from elsewhere.
Yes, I believe so. And that's what this. Yes, I'll need to certainly where we have income from external sources, we'll include that income in our calculations, and therefore we show the gross cost. I'd need to clarify whether we've done exactly that based on what you described there. And of course, I don't know if there's anything else in addition, because this just says it's a movement.
Okay.
Is it that when this was written that you didn't know whether you were going to get the parish money or not, or?
I don't know. I don't know.
It just seemed an alarmingly high number, even with the parish council. The second one that catches my eye is the saving of something approaching £6 million on California Crossroads. What on earth are we going to do to it?
Simply reprofile. So you'll see that it's oh, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong line. Can I find it?
Crossroads.
Oh yes. So it's saying that the residual budget over 5 years is 5520. And therefore this is significantly reprofiling. So I think you'll find it means the money will be spent earlier. So if you look at column revised budget over 4 years, you're still saying there's 5520 left. Are you saying that 5520 is higher than you expected?
It certainly seems a lot of money for that project. I mean, I'm not someone who knows about other crossroad projects, but just from the conversations we've had in Finchamps, is that spend of that sort was never mentioned. And again, there will be a still contribution from the parish council on that. But I'm still trying to understand whether that was a spend that was 10 and is now sort of 5. Because of there's a big number in the year 25-26, and then there's the revised budget over 4 years of 5.5. I'm trying to work out what that actually means. Have we gone from 10 to 5, or is it 5? It's just moved about a bit.
I'll need to clarify. I think some of it is because some's in this year, 22-23, and therefore negates the need for later. But I'll come back to you on that.
Sure.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to ask about the early footbridge. It was going to be fully rebuilt, and now it seems to have been downgraded to just a repair, and that concerns me slightly. I'm just wondering, is a repair simply papering over the cracks and wasting money in the longer term? And I realise it's been reprofiled to the following year, so we don't normally talk too much about things that have been reprofiled to the following year, but it just concerns me slightly that something that's been assessed as needing to be rebuilt now can just be repaired.
I think it's a question for Paul, really.
Well, it is really, but I did submit it ahead of time, so I don't know whether Graham has managed to.
Yeah, I understand it. They went out and did an inspection of it and come up with something new. So yeah.
Well, I can give you the response from the service, which I'm comfortable with. It says no decision has yet been made in relation to whether the bridge is replaced or repaired. The current structure has not reached its anticipated life span. Therefore, the council is currently investigating improvements to the bridge and are engaged with consultants to carry out investigations for either refurbishment or replacement. Then it goes on to say there's a number of challenges and what have you. So I think really we need to do the work to find out, and I appreciate the point. There needs to be a business case assessment of cost of refurbishment versus life given through refurbishment and a complete rebuild.
Presumably all that was done before and then somebody came up with the idea that, right, it's got to be rebuilt. I realise that, you know, it is a highway, obviously this has come from highways and you're just telling us what they've said, but yeah, I think we need to probe a bit more deeply on that generally.
Question.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get out.
Okay, Pauline.
Yes.
Shirley.
Oh, thanks, Shirley. Just for my background, just sorry to ask questions that you've probably already answered, but is this all of capital, or is it just capital that's coming out of the council's borrowing? So does it include 106 and Sill?
It's includes all sorts, and it's not all capital. It's simply the changes that have been enacted on the schemes from lockdown 1.
Thank you, that helps a lot. So just so I understand, that means that California Crossroads, if I've read this right, we're going to be spending 200,000 more in 23-24 than we did in the last iteration. But we're taking money out of the future, is that right? Just to make sure I've got my reds and blacks right.
That's California Crossroads. You're absolutely right. More in 23-24, so as in brought forward from 24-25, and those figures have been taken out at 25-26 and 26-27. However, it does say the revised budget over 4 years for California Crossroads is 5520.
Thank you. So I'll go and look at my paperwork and see what it was last time I looked.
Okay, David.
Sorry,
It was
sorry, there was one
other question. Then
one
probably.
other point, I think. The reason we're having a little bit of a highways moment is that Shirley and I spent at least a year being told it was impossible to repair early station footbridge. It's brilliant news if it can be repaired. It's just that we're having a bit of difficulty swallowing the fact that we went round that loop about 10 times and were consistently told that it was impossible and it couldn't be done.
It's worth a question to Paul, I guess, but I'm sure he'll tell you how he.
It's much better if we can.
Yeah.
Not.
Al, then David.
Yeah, just, I mean, to go back to the scrutiny meeting we had when Paul was here, he did say it would be repaired, didn't he? And that's affected his budget now, where it's gone down to 2.1 million instead of 6.7. He said that the main structure could stay and it's just the ramp. So he did say that in this meeting.
He might have done, but I was spent the last bit.
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, it's getting repaired, but as you say, it's worth asking a question about.
Well, I think that is the way forward, is to ask a question about to Paul of this. Is that something we could do as a committee? Yeah.
Is it, sorry, I'm getting confused. Is this the early footbridge or the California one we're talking about? The early footbridge.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you've still got time, I think, to submit a question.
Okay.
Thursday.
So just for clarity then, we don't need to have this committee ask it because you are going to be asking that at the executive this coming Thursday.
I have a question at executive this Thursday, just asking what the plan is to ensure that this crossings remain available.
Okay. That would be a good place to get the answer.
If you want me to add supplementaries, please let me know.
Okay. All right.
But yeah.
And this
I
shows
can make it a
that
long one. Was it?
No, it's David's. Okay.
sorry, can I just say this? You'll see in your pack, it goes lockdown 2, then lockdown 3. So there were 2 iterations of changes on capital, not revenue. So this shows, and then early footbridge, we reduced down to 2.1 million. So it's currently based on the repair option, as you've discussed, albeit no firm decision has been made, but that's what the budget provision is based on.
Okay, David.
Sorry, Pauline, there's not to be back to the question of California Crossroads again. So if I'm reading this correct, on the red numbers, the two 200s cross each other out, but we've saved somewhere north of £6 million, but we've still got a budget left of £5.5 million, if I read that correctly. But I seem to remember that the whole Cali Crossroads project was out of S106 that couldn't be reallocated elsewhere. If you've saved £6 million in that S106, where's the money going to go?
It's not necessarily saved. I'll have to check it out, but I think it's substantially reprofiling. So it means it's more likely to happen in earlier years than later years. But like I said, I'll get back to you on that.
Okay, that doesn't say that.
I'm thinking that the 200 is coming out of.
The 200 is clear reprofiling that's been brought forward.
Yeah.
But there's 6 million.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's 6 million, 25, 26, 26, 27. And we've still got a revised budget of 5.5, which is a blooming expensive crossroads, but what do I know? But more importantly, if that is all S106 money, and I was led to believe several times the whole budget for Cali Crossroads was S106, then we can't actually we shouldn't be redeploying that 6 million elsewhere.
I think certainly where it's got to now, it will be substantially section 106. I suspect that there was an additional funding required over and above, which has been pared back.
Ollie.
Maybe just to clarify all this, Graham, you could just tell us what the original budget was split by capital and revenue, and what the new budget is split by capital and revenue, and split the capital into 106 and SIL versus stuff that the council has to pay for, and that solved this question once and for all. And I think I've already asked you that anyway. I wanted to ask about the new pool at Arborfield, if anybody hasn't already asked about that. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think Councillor Norman Young's thinking, no, I think you know about it anyway. So anyway, this has been in the capital programme for quite some time now, last 3 years or so, and it's yet to prove itself in terms of a business case. And as you'll see, it's been moved to 25, 26. So it's been a potential aspiration for some time and has featured in numerous previous MTFPs, but still by no means no firm plans or business case backing it.
Oh, could I just ask about the public rights of way network? I mean, that's a lot of savings. I mean, is this particular schemes or that we're creating public rights of way that we're not going to create now?
Yes, I think in the imperative to balance the books, all lines have been challenged, and I think there might have been some desired schemes that, I mean, to be honest, I don't know how fully formed they'll be, but they sat on in terms of a budget line at one time. So yeah, that's a clear reduction there.
Let's spend on public rights away, sorry.
Chris.
This is a bit of a singular point about the public rights of way, but the Shinfield Parish Council have made statements to myself or representations to show that they've put SIL money towards finishing off rights of way that are formed in the current new developments, where the developer has gone to a certain point and then the tail end still needs to be finished. So there are some quite muddy tracks. I do understand there is an entity within the council that is responsible for finishing off those things. But are they likely to be impacted by this statement about the reduction?
I'm aware of some work that's going on in Shinfields, building tracks and through woodland and stuff. And there's one near a play area, I remember. I know Ian has approached me about it because he's still got it in his budget and can we sign this off? So I suspect that what you're talking about might possibly be tackled, but I think the detail of which is probably a question for Ian. But I've certainly seen things that relate to footpaths being finished and work being done. So.
Yeah, just sort of in summary there, it looks like the savings of nearly 14 million of the capital budget going through. And I can't remember what we discussed at previous scrutiny meetings on the capital budget, but that seems to be a large number compared with what we discussed before. And we haven't quite seemed to have subjected these savings to perhaps the same level of rigorous scrutiny that we did on the previous ones. And I appreciate the timing of all the efforts of the essence, but there's some big decisions being made there that we don't seem to have much chance to challenge.
I entirely agree, because I think that there is a lot more work needs to be done on our capital programme. And I've sort of said it to the other exec members, we need to look at the projects, things we're doing with more detail. There's been a lot of focus on the revenue side of things of this budget and getting things sorted out for this coming year, which, as you can see, we've sort of got. But I think what's been shoved into the years 2 and 3 does need looking at more closely by this committee and by our executive as well, because it needs. It also affects our borrowing. You know, if we're borrowing money to pay for these capital projects, that interest from that borrowing comes out of revenue. So we do need to be having a better look at this probably over the next year and analysing it a bit better. Is that fair something to say?
But yes, but also if we don't take that £14 million out, we don't have a balanced capital programme. And so I suppose, and quite a lot of this, sizable amount is pushing decisions into future years. So I suppose it would really be if there was something that was looked completely wrong, then that would be an observation that this committee could make to executive or council.
Not all of this stuff that's listed here for next year can we, not all of it will happen.
Yeah, I think the key thing you're saying is we're now presenting changes of £14 million in this slide here. So I suppose if you had a particular, well, I suppose there's two things. One is you can ask for further information that we can provide back, but ultimately ONS can make an observation or recommendation if you felt that was necessary.
I think it was more a general sense that, as I alluded to at the start, we spent an awful lot of time scrutinising the revenue budgets with not a huge amount of added value by the look of it in terms of money saved. But we've gone through this capital budget tonight pretty quickly. I know we looked at capital budgets in the previous meetings, and there are things there. I take your point entirely. We need to save the money or to balance the budget. But there's things like the savings, as Al just made on the public rights of way network, which is reduced. That budget's reduced by what's that, 3/4 nearly, and some other big items in there as well, which might have been worthy of a bit more time to debate than we're going to manage this evening.
I entirely agree with you, I'm afraid to say.
Yeah, so what we have discussed here in the revenue and the capital is that £90 million in year 1, 74 million year 2, and 65 in year 3. So this is, albeit sizable, a variance to those figures. Okay, so this was the, I don't know how that happened. Yeah, so
So, quick question about the land acquisition for the major road schemes. Which ones are those?
So the council held a budget for, it was like a contingency to be able to undertake major so land acquisitions for major schemes. And now we've come to the end of the core strategy, the local plan delivery. This was one of the budget lines we looked at to see, do we really need it? And the answer is we only have one remaining property to buy, and therefore we've reduced that budget significantly, which has been extremely helpful in bridging the gap. So it's just reducing the previous contingency.
Okay. Shirley, did you have a question?
General questions, and I don't know, these are two that I also put in. These are things that are kind of not there rather than things that are there, I think is the best way to say it. So, I mean, assuming that the proposal to move across to fortnightly bin collections gets approved, shouldn't there be a large capital spend somewhere for the purchase of wheelie bins, for example? And the other one is also on waste as well, this business of the, in the previous years, there's been this 89,000 for buying recycling equipment, apparatus, bags and the like for increased households, new households and so forth. But if the council goes to a sort of a 2-weekly bin collection, it strikes me that there would be, for example, with the green bags, a lot of households will need twice as many because they're going to be having to keep their, and that figure hasn't changed. And I would have thought there would have been some consideration given to that, and also that there would be some figure to take account of inflation, because surely the cost of those bags has gone up since those figures were put in the previous year. Or am I being too, going into this too deeply?
Well, I'll start with your first one. That's much safer ground for me, and then I'll have a go at the second one based on the response I got from the service. So the business case that will be coming through to the various, through to scrutiny and then on to executive, it will be based on, from my latest understanding, is that there will be a utilisation of some of the residual RE3 funds, earmarked reserves, in order to fund the cost of capital, which will then be replenished because the ongoing revenue business case will provide for replenishment over a period of time and still make a surplus. So there'll be an initial drawing down of reserves and then a replacement over time. Once that's determined, you're absolutely right. For completeness, we can show that coming into the capital programme and then an earmark reserve funding it and all of that. But at the moment, it's kind of just wrapped up in a net savings position after covering the cost of capital financing. So it's okay. It's shown net. It's the year 2 that it appears. So it's not next year. Mm-hmm. It's year 2 that's shown as a net after paying for its capital. But I think if it was all kind of dissected, that's how we'll show it, which will then show the fact that it's a cost in the capital programme, but then the capital programme has the credit of the RE3 equalisation fund, and then you've got on the revenue side the charge to revenue paying back the equalisation fund as it goes.
Okay, so this money from RE3, that's free money, is it? They just give us that?
No, this is money that we've built up as a council
right.
over time since the beginning of the RE3 project.
Okay, so we've got some kind of, we've been using them like a savings bank.
That type of thing to as it says on the tin, equalise the impact. So in the very early days of the PFI, there were some very substantial, big lumpy items of revenue, which I created this reserve to absorb those, and then knowing that they would be able to be replenished. So it equalises the impact on the council taxpayer over time, rather than impacting those lumpy upsides or downsides over the period on the council taxpayer.
Okay. So why did we not dip into there when the green bags were bought? That's probably not
Well
to answer. I don't know, but just.
I would say it shouldn't be used to prop up ongoing expenditure, and therefore the wheelie bins are one-off, is then replenished. And if something's an ongoing line, it shouldn't be funded through a reserve.
Okay.
Would be my financial response to that.
On that subject, so if you're taking money out of the RE3 earmarked reserve to spend on wheelie bins and then refilling the reserve using saved revenue from the business case that you hope is going to deliver some savings for you, which is mainly seems to be about increase in recycling rates. A, what happens if you don't get that saving that you thought you were going to get? B, why did you have a earmarked reserve in the first place if you had no intention of spending it? And if you had an intention of spending it, what risk is that inserted into the council's books by spending it on something it wasn't designed for?
Right. The answer to the first part is the risk is the same as any other savings program of work or what have you. If the savings don't materialize, then it would either appear as a revenue monitoring pressure, and I think that's probably where it would appear, unless there was an agreement that we wouldn't replenish the RE3 contract. So it's the same, but I'd say in purity, it should feature as a pressure in the revenue monitoring, just the same as any of the other plans, if they don't materialise on revenue, that is. As for the RE3, well, there's always a potential use for the RE3 equalisation fund, because at the end of the RE3 contract, there will undoubtedly be some costs, maybe dilapidations, maybe research into or feasibility into new models, what have you. And it's the same with using any earmark reserve, is if you use them, they do, of course, increase the risk of the bill if something happens. But as I said, I mean, our council has £100 odd million worth of earmark reserves, and we felt it's incumbent to look at them closely to see what could be used to help with the current budget challenge.
Sorry, just one final question on that then. What's the RE3 earmark reserve that we've got left in it after you've spent it on wheelie bins and whatever else you want to spend it on? And what was it to begin with?
Right, it was about 5.5. 1.4 was budget transfer, and then 1.5 million, so about 3, taking 5.5 down to about 2.5, thereabouts.
I might add with the wheelie bins, I mean, obviously we are spending what, £350,000 a year on plastic bags, on blue bags, yes?
Yes.
So obviously if we replace them with wheelie bins, then we're not going to be spending that kind of money on blue bags. So, and over a period of wheelie bins last 10 years, you know, you're not buying it every year. So there is going to be some money in that process, but obviously we're probably going to need to keep some people with blue bags. But, if we're buying wheelie bins, and wheelie bins last 10 years, so economically, over a number of years.
But the amount of money you'd have to spend in interest on £4 million worth of wheelie bins is about the same as the blue bags cost you. So if all you do is use the money that you would have spent on blue bags at the end of it, you still got a bill in terms of the capital repayment.
But all of that will come out in the business case.
That's
which we would like to see.
Speculatively, it's not, there's no business case yet, so.
So moving to,
I've got Chris wants
oh,
to.
sorry, I thought Shirley had a second point.
Sorry, Shirley.
This was about the 89K for recycling. Yes, okay. So fortnightly collections will not take effect until 24-25, although the number of blue bags provided for 23-24 has been reduced from 80 to 54. If there is an uptake in requests for recycling bags in 23-24, we have 55,000 in stock, which is enough for 75% of households to request an additional bag before any costs. It's therefore felt that the existing budget is currently sufficient.
So just talking about the equalisation fund, would that not be so far-fetched to turn around and say that it would have been used or could have been used for refurbishing vehicles, or if there were fuel changes, if you change that sort of thing? That's the sort of area where that would have been aimed at, that spend?
No, I think those types of expenditures are covered by the contractor. This would be more our costs of if there are any, say, dilapidations at the end. So this was 25 years, RE3, the facilities, or indeed the work that would need to go into considering the new arrangements beyond that 25 years. It is indeed possible that there can be extensions to the current arrangements, so we may have more time than even set out in the current contract.
I was just going to ask a question. And with regards to that, could there be any impact on the Towtley depot fixing me up project? Because that's where the lorries are kept.
They're not all kept there.
I'm not aware that there would be an impact on that.
I'm just wondering if some of that fund could be used to help with the expenditure at the Towtley depot.
Towtley depot supports a number of different businesses up there. It isn't just about bin lorries, but I think that it's got the gardening equipment up there, and loads of gritting lorries are obviously up there. Yeah, there's a lot going on up there and it isn't all about bin lorries.
But in terms the financial response to your question is the remaining money in the RE3 equalisation fund could be used towards the capital programme, such as Towtley Depot. That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Pauline.
Thank you. Just one other question on that then. If you're going to take 2 million out of the, sorry, you're going to take 3.5 million out of the earmarked reserve for RE3, does that mean a reduction in our income in terms of interest on that? So you would have thought, I don't know, 200 grand, something like that, less revenue income because we no longer have this capital sitting around doing nothing?
It's 3 million.
Sorry.
Well, 1.5 and 1.5 or 2.9. At the moment, that will be earning maybe about 0.5% or, yeah, not much. I'll check out the latest, but we don't get a lot on interest and balances at the moment. I'll check out the latest, but it's not huge.
And that includes the interest rates that we get loaning it to other councils?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking of an average or even deposit.
Interesting to know, Graham, how much that's going to lose us.
Yeah, okay.
Norman.
Just check, Graham, that the business case for the proposed changes to the waste collection will have all this detailed, all the sort of questions we're asking about, the cost of wheelie bins and all the rest of it. It'll have all that in.
That's the plan. At the moment,
In enough detail that we can sort of see what's what.
At the moment, we don't know how much the wheelie bins are going to be. That's the plan. What I understand for the business case.
Put all the assumptions in and state them quite clearly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And that will be coming to a scrutiny committee anyway, won't it?
I hope so. Yes.
Management.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, are we done with asking questions on this slide?
These are just summary changes that shows that we still have overall a funding gap of 28 million. And therefore, paring back capital programme, looking for new lines of income is going to be a constant struggle, albeit we've made quite significant inroads. And that's it.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions to Graham? And then we can. Yeah, no. Yeah, I know.
Could Graham give us a breakdown of what earmark reserves he's got left now?
So that's one of the questions I was going to say. The summary, we do want to see what other reserves we have, because you mentioned there's
100 million, he said.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what it is, but it's significant. Yeah.
So I think that would just be as a summary to come back to this committee, or do it via email, or whatever. It's just a report out of what the reserves are and maybe what they can be used for.
But generally, they're not available for use. But yeah.
Yeah, but obviously we've got no visibility into it, so it'd be useful to see what that is.
Yep.
Any other questions on the budgetary aspect of it?
Sorry, Norman just made the point that I think Graham said 100 million of earmark reserves. It'd be interesting to know what other reserves there are as well. And presumably with an earmark reserve, if you don't need it, you can only earmark it and use it for something else, which is what you've just done.
The revenue reserves we hold outside of general fund are all called earmark reserves. So that's the lot. The question is, can you use? Well, the answer is yes, if the conditions change. And that's been something I spent quite a bit of time on this year, to go through all of our earmark reserves to see some are in, you could say, are insufficient, need continued attention, propping up. Others you can say, well, it's legitimate to be able to look to draw these down, but it's not a perfect science. It's trying to manage the quantum of risks by categorizing your available resources.
Yeah, it might be interesting for you to come back at some point in the near future just to talk about the reserves then. I know that's more work for you, but it seems like it's a worthwhile topic, because while we have reserves, there's a risk associated with having not enough reserves. So nice to be able to dig into that maybe.
Yeah, I think it would be better for me to come and present rather than just send an email out. I think that's a good call, because it's very complex and it's easy to say, well, that's a nice big figure, we'll have that, and yet the risk that sits behind it is considerably.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, we do have an Appendix B with temporary worker report, and I know that was something that either Pauline or Laura was interested in the past.
It was me, and we've gone through it at the personnel board.
Okay, yeah, and you're happy with that then? Just want to make sure that
I just want to make sure. I think so, yes, but I'm willing. Anybody else wants to ask questions?
Okay. Does anybody else have any queries on this report? No. No.
I think the particularly interesting thing that when we went through it at the personnel board had a lot more detail than this, was what the plans were for the people that had been around over 3 years, and also whether they were actually more expensive as temporary staff or interim workers or consultants than they would be if they were full-time staff. So the set of questions came out of the personnel board along those lines. So it was useful to see, and I think it prompted some more questions, which will come back to personnel board. I'm summarising that right, Graham?
I wasn't aware of the personnel board conversation, although I'm aware that there was more detail because I believe it was discussed in part 2, isn't it?
Was it went through at an individual post level, and there were questions about, particular posts that had been interim for 3 years. Why is that? Is it costing more than it would do if it was a permanent member of staff? All that sort of stuff. So it was a very useful report, and this is a summary.
I think very clearly, obviously, most of these positions are covering statutory roles, things that we absolutely have to be doing. And the fact that they can't be filled by permanent staff, which would be the ideal, they are using agencies for social work positions.
It wasn't the social work positions we were asking about. It was and I won't quote them because we're not in part 2, but it was some of the other roles that were not, didn't appear on the surface to be shortage areas, but had been interim for rather a long time.
Yeah, it's not unreasonable to ask that, but obviously, largely they're covering roles that, you can't fill otherwise, so.
Okay, really, so for summary from that one, that's actually covered by the personnel boards, and you're happy with the coverage of that at the personnel board? Yeah, okay, thank you. Right, so I think that brings us to the end of the medium-term financial plan. So really with the caveat of just come back with talk about the reserves. Oh yeah, I realised that. You've got something else to do.
Is that possibly best sometime in the summer? Yeah,
Yes,
summer.
Yeah,
that sounds more like it.
especially as lots of earmark reserves get utilised throughout the course of the year. So to get a year-end position come back in the summer,
Yeah,
will help me at least, because at least the music would have stopped.
okay, that's it. Okay, right, thank you for your time.
All right.
Right, so moving on, we have LC Whip Task and Finish Group Terms of Reference. So Callum's been kind enough to put terms of reference together. So any comments, questions, Laura?
Thank you. So is the aim really just to feedback on the latest consultation? Because I was under the impression that would be given the pretty much final LC whip before it gets agreed at executive for feedback from the task and finish group. What I'm pulling, but that doesn't seem to be what we're going to be covering.
Yeah, so there's I think going to be probably 2 meetings. So the first meeting, which is on Wednesday, is, as you say, it's that sort of initial further dive into the summary of the consultation and sort of where we're at. The second meeting should be looking more at what will actually be presented to the executive. So it'll be more of a draft paper. I think, as Paul has emailed to you, that the real detail of each scheme will come forward as and when that scheme is sent to the executive for approval. So it won't go into that real deep dive detail for each scheme, but it will give you a much better overview of what will be in that draft LC whip. That's my understanding.
And I think the 1st of February is penciled in for that second meeting. So do we know when we'll be given the plans? Because we've been shared the consultation, but not the actual plans.
I think I'll have to ask the officers on that. That date is potentially, it can move because we've got a little bit more time, because I believe that's going to the March executive. That's my understanding. So we've got a little bit of wriggle room, but not much. So specifically it's when you say the plans, what do you mean by them?
Well, what the near final LC whip plans are going to be from the outcome of the consultation. I was just looking at the forward plan, and it said that the 6th of Feb meeting is going to be to agree the final reports.
I was going to come to that. We probably won't. We can probably scrap that date, and we'll. The report will be finalised prior to our March meeting. It'll be finalised sometime in February, but the committee will then just confirm the report. So my update in a little bit was going to be that we probably don't need that meeting on the 6th.
I see. Yeah, if you could confirm dates with officers, that'd be great. Thanks, Callum.
And Callum, can you make sure we get it in a usable format? Because the LC whip itself, the first set of data that we had was completely unusable. So I'm not criticizing, I'm not talking about scrutiny. I don't think anything you've done is absolutely fine, but it was extremely difficult to work out what the heck was in there, and it was all presented on maps that meant you had to, and in the end we had to get them emailed to us. It was pretty horrendous in terms of its presentation. So if we could get something a bit more user friendly, that would really help.
So I'll speak with Rob, who's leading on this from the officer point of view, and I will do my best in terms of getting the best data we can. As I say, my hope is that in the second meeting, what you'll look at is much more akin to what will actually be presented to the executive. So I'm hoping that what will be presented to them will be in a readable format, but I will have a discussion and I'll come back.
Shirley.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just wondering whether including the terms of reference, there might be something to do with how to encourage use of cycleways, something about promoting cycleways, getting people to, not new people to cycle particularly, but even just the people who ignore cycleways at the moment have got perfectly good ones to cycle on, and they still prefer to use the road. So I just wonder whether part of this task and finish should be kind of looking at ways of really promoting cycling in that way. And I wondered whether Sustrans might be a useful organisation to call in as a witness, because they obviously run the national cycling network, and they seem to be able to find lots of sources of funding, and they do a lot of promotional work. So it just occurred to me that they might be a useful organisation.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. So, okay, anybody else got any comments on the LC whip? No? Okay, so that brings us on to the work programme. So Callum had a proposal about 6th of February's meeting.
Yeah, so we won't need that now because of how the dates work with getting the final reports to the executive. I wondered, Chair, if at this point we just hand over to Shirley to talk about the other task and finish group.
Just before we go on to that, I'm just, whilst it's nice to cancel a meeting, I'm just wondering, with Narinda coming in back to present, because the following meeting we've got a whole bunch of stuff.
I could ask. I would have thought that the item on the combating drugs partnership it's still not ready for implementation. I'd need to ask Narinda as sort of when we're looking at actually implementing it. I'm not sure how much more detail could be provided at that meeting, but I'm happy to ask if
yeah, if you don't mind.
I mean, does the committee want that item sort of now, or would they be happy to push it into the next municipal year if that was appropriate? I suppose that's the question.
Yep. Comments around the table, starting with David.
Yeah, I must admit, the summary note that I read was one of the least informative 2 pages of text I've seen when I've been here. So I'd certainly rather push it back because I've actually got something to say.
Pauline.
That was what I was about to say.
Yep. Okay, that's fine.
So does that mean the 6th of Feb is cancelled? Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. So, well, I tried. Okay, 6th of March, we're happy with.
Yep. So I am just waiting to hear back from Narinda and Francesca about the violence against women and girls update. But as far as I'm aware, we should be able to get an update then for that one. And at the bottom, the task and finish group reports, that will be hopefully when, if there are any recommendations from either task and finish group, that's when the committee will just sign them off fully so they can be considered by the executive in March.
Okay, and as we mentioned, task and finish, Shirley.
Yeah, just to give members an update, we held another meeting on the 10th of January and decided that the survey, which had been requested to the providers to send out the mini survey. I don't know if you remember, there's 5 questions, very simple survey. And after a fortnight, I think there were about 12 responses. So it was quite clear that some of them hadn't sent it out at all. In fact, most of them hadn't sent it out at all. So we took the decision to share it on local social media. And as of today, I think Callum said that we've had 151 responses, which is a bit more like it. So we'll hopefully have the outcomes of those in the next couple of days, some sort of overview of that. So that's really useful. We've also will be circulating the notes of our last meeting, which have got a whole raft of recommendations and a whole list of things. And I should have signed it off today, Callum, and I apologise. So I'll do that this evening, and then from tomorrow it can go out to everybody to have a look at. And please, feel free to sort of query anything or chip in if you think something isn't robust enough. The interviews all finished and the recommendations are going to executive to take on all the providers. However, one particular provider is if we like been put into special measures, so they've got to improve their performance. Whether they may just say, okay, well, we'll go it alone, we won't bother to be a preferred provider, or they may be so keen to be a preferred provider that they will attempt to up their game. But this is the one where there's been all the issues with service charges, not listening to residents, the ones who run the Lily May Court, which everyone has heard of, the ones who overcharge the service charges at the Jasmine Square, and so on and so forth. So they really need to, I think, be made aware that the council is not happy with that kind of behaviour. And so, yeah, I think that's about where we're at. Have you got anything to add, Callum, on that?
Just that the next meeting is on the 30th. That's when the Task and Finish group will be looking at the list. There's about 10 initial draft recommendations at the moment. They might be added to or slimmed down. I think after that, I believe, Shirley, the aim is to maybe have possibly just one more meeting and then draft a report, which will eventually come to this committee, and then submit that to the executive with the officer recommendations. But we've met with several external witnesses. The executive member has been involved. There's been lots of officer involvement. TLIP have also provided some helpful information as well. So I think it's been a pretty thorough look at it so far. And as was mentioned at management, not all of you are on management, because Peter asked a question there about this. The reason that we're selecting the partners in January, but this report's going to be later, is because they're 2 separate processes. The aim of the Task and Finish group isn't to interfere with who gets selected and who doesn't. There's an associated agreement with these partners as to how we operate with them, and that's being signed by the partners prior to them taking on the contract in April. So that's why March works as the date to sort of try and shape that agreement a little bit.
You might not know, Callum, but what's the termination agreement if particularly people in special measures don't perform?
Correct me if I'm wrong, Shirley, but I believe because it's an agreement, we can terminate at any time. I believe that's what Francis has said. It will be in the meeting notes from one of our meetings, so I will dig it out for you and let you know.
Microphone.
The contract is a 3+2 arrangement, but I think that if we're not happy with the performance of any one particular provider, or if equally, I guess, if something happens like they suddenly get, a smaller one suddenly gets bought up by a larger one, we could certainly review our arrangements with them. That was the impression I got from we both got from Francis on that.
Just kind of a throw out that question. What, and maybe answer when you come back. Maybe answer when you come back with the Task and Finish. What advantage does it give to such a company to be a provider as opposed to not being a provider? And that's probably just answer when you come back to the Task and Finish, not right now.
I think the advantage to them is that they get listed for the developers. So when there's an S106 agreement, a large development, there's a list given to the developers and say, these are our preferred providers. We would like you to provide, these, to choose one or more of these to provide the social housing. So it's a way in for them with the developers. However, they don't have, the developers don't have to choose someone who's on the preferred providers list. If somebody else, another association, went to them and said, we'd like to get that 50 houses, 50 flats, whatever it is, they could equally go with them. And I don't think we'd have the council's got much leverage on that.
Another question for Shirley, actually. I believe we've got our own registered provider, haven't we?
We have.
Do we ever recommend those, or do we ever put them on the list?
Yeah, they're on the list. Loddon Homes. Loddon Homes are on the list, and they had to go through the same process as the other providers.
Do they ever get picked?
Pardon?
Do they ever get picked by developers?
I don't know that they've done much elsewhere outside of the. Good question. Actually, we could find that out. I'll
maybe, if not, why not? Would be a good question as well.
Yeah, I suspect it's something to do with resource. Most of these other providers, they shed loads of money, basically. So I think that's probably the answer we'd be given. But I will find out.
Shirley, any other? I think we're done. Yeah. Okay. I think we're done fairly early as well.
And thank you for your forbearance with me nipping out and nipping back in again.